Last week, the President of the European Commission called for a region-wide Tobin Tax. That's a tax on all financial transactions. In his State of the Union address, he said, taxpayers have granted aid and provided guarantees of 4.6 trillion euros to the financial sector. It's time for the financial sector to make a contribution back to society. But is the financial sector already making a contribution? And if not, is a Tobin tax a good way for it to do so? I spoke to Dr. Philip Booth, who's Professor of Insurance and Risk Management here at Cass Business School, to see what he thinks about the matter.
Well, he appears to be proposing a tax of 0.1% on financial transactions, a different tax rate on derivatives transactions, which took place in companies which were domiciled within the European Union and other related companies. And this is a tax which would, according to the European Commission, at current levels of financial transactions, perhaps raise up to £50 billion. And it's suggested that this would, by and large, be used for EU central funds. In other words, possibly replace existing contributions that European Union countries make to central funds, for example, levies on value-added tax and so on.
And do we actually know what this money is going to be spent on?
Well, here we're rather light on details, both the extent to which it would actually go to the European Union centrally and the extent to which the money will be kept by member states. But this is, of course, a crucial issue for Britain, because 80% of the transactions that would be taxed actually take place within the United Kingdom. So out of that £50 billion that the Commission believes could, in the best possible circumstances, be raised, £40 billion might come from the United Kingdom, and it's been suggested by one commentator that this is a bit like having a tax on olives in order to spend the money on refurbishing red telephone boxes.
So it sounds like this Tobin tax or Robin Hood tax is not going to be a great thing for the UK?
No, it'd be pretty. Transactions taxes have been quite disastrous in any area in any country where they've been used, and particularly if the European Union were to go it alone in this regard, then the likelihood is that financial business would leach out of the European Union, and the actual tax take would be much less than the European Commission expects. For example, when Sweden imposed a unilateral transactions tax on its banks, the revenues in some years were only about 3% of the expected revenues.
OK, so not great for the UK. But what about for Europe?
Well, the idea is that so many of these transactions are, in a phrase that was used by Adair Turner, socially useless, that if this helped reduce the volume of financial activity, that this might be a good thing. I find that really rather doubtful. I mean, apart from anything else, it's extremely difficult, a priori, to distinguish between a socially useful and, if such a thing exists, a socially useless investment transaction. So, for example, young companies raising money through private equity could well be, we don't know the details, but could well be caught by this transactions tax. If a bank was trying to securitize a mortgage portfolio or was simply trying to manage the risk on a mortgage portfolio to reduce its exposure to changes in interest rates, then it will be caught by that transactions tax as well. And of course the cost will be will be imposed upon the customer. But there's another interesting issue here as well, which is that most of us have been really quite concerned over the last 3 or 4 weeks about what might happen to the banking sector if there were to be a sovereign default event, if one or more of the governments which are finding it more and more difficult to borrow money within the European Union were actually to default. And it's quite likely that this would bring down the banking sector. Well, imposing a £50 billion tax on the banking sector in those circumstances is not an especially bright idea.
Professor Philip Booth, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.